In this episode, we dive into a tense encounter that spirals out of control, testing the boundaries of authority and individual rights. It all begins with a routine interaction. A female officer approaches a citizen for what seems like a standard ID check. But things take an unexpected turn when the officer's behavior raises eyebrows. Her approach is abrasive, her tone unprofessional, and her actions leave the citizen questioning her understanding of the very laws she's meant to uphold. What starts as a simple refusal to provide ID quickly escalates into a heated exchange, with the officer overstepping her bounds and the citizens standing firm on their rights. As tensions rise, witnesses gather, cameras roll, and the situation takes a dramatic turn. The officer's actions spark outrage, leading to consequences no one saw coming. Stay tuned to uncover how this clash of authority and accountability unfolds. You won't believe what happens next. It's a story of justice, consequences, and a powerful lesson in knowing your rights. As the officer continues to press for ID, the citizen calmly explains their rights, citing laws that protect individuals from being forced to provide identification without reasonable suspicion of a crime. The officer, visibly frustrated, insists she's in the right, but her arguments lack clarity. Her body language becomes more aggressive, and her voice rises, drawing the attention of passers-by. A small crowd begins to gather, phones in hand, recording the exchange. Some whisper among themselves, questioning the officer's behavior, while others remain silent, unsure of what to make of the situation. The citizen, though visibly nervous, holds their ground, refusing to back down. Meanwhile, the officer's frustration seems to boil over. Instead of de-escalating, she doubles down, making threats that only serve to fuel the tension. The crowd grows more vocal, with a few individuals stepping forward to voice their concerns. What started as a routine encounter has now become a public spectacle, leaving everyone wondering, how far will this go, and what will happen next? The tension in the air was thick as the officer's demeanor grew more intimidating. Her words were sharp, and her insistence on compliance felt more like a personal challenge than a lawful demand. The citizen, steady but clearly uneasy, kept repeating their stance, citing the need for reasonable suspicion and asking for clarification on what crime they were suspected of committing. The officer, however, sidestepped the questions, her focus solely on asserting control over the situation. Among the crowd, a few voices began to grow louder. Some sided with the citizen, pointing out the apparent misuse of authority, while others urged them to comply, fearing the situation might escalate further. A man in a business suit quietly approached the edge of the scene, muttering about filing a complaint if things went any further. A young woman recording on her phone whispered to her friend, "This isn't right, she's just trying to intimidate him." But the officer wasn't backing down. Instead, she reached for her radio, calling for backup. The crowd murmured in disbelief, and the citizen's face tightened with concern. What would happen when more officers arrived? Would they uphold the law or back their colleague, no matter what? The situation felt like it was on the verge of boiling over, and everyone present could sense it. The sound of the officer's radio crackling to life sent a ripple through the crowd. Everyone knew things were escalating, but no one was sure how far it would go. The citizens stood their ground, their voice steady but laced with a hint of fear. "I've done nothing wrong," they said firmly, their eyes locking with the officers. "You're overstepping your authority." The officer's face tightened, her frustration boiling just beneath the surface. The crowd grew restless, with some people stepping closer, their phones capturing every second. A few began to ask questions aloud. Why is backup needed for this? What crime has he committed? The officer ignored them, her focus solely on maintaining control. Moments later, the sound of sirens pierced the air. 2 patrol cars pulled up, and additional officers stepped out, scanning the scene. The tension was palpable. Would these officers de-escalate the situation or follow the lead of their colleague? The citizen glanced at the arriving officers, their expression a mix of hope and unease. The crowd, now larger, waited in suspense, their collective breath held as the confrontation reached its breaking point. As the backup officers approached, the crowd fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. One of the new officers, a senior with a calm but commanding presence, stepped forward and addressed the original officer. "What's the situation here?" he asked, his tone measured but firm. Before she could respond, the citizen spoke up, their voice clear despite the tension. "I haven't committed a crime, and I've repeatedly asked for clarification on why I'm being detained. She hasn't provided any valid reason." The senior officer glanced at the citizen, then at the crowd, noting the phones recording from every angle. His expression shifted subtly, as if realizing this was no ordinary situation. But just as it seemed like cooler heads might prevail, the original officer cut in, doubling down. "He's refusing to comply with an ID check. That's enough to detain him." Her voice was sharp, her frustration evident. The senior officer frowned, clearly uneasy with her response, but before he could speak, a voice from the crowd interrupted. "I saw everything," said an older man, stepping forward. "She had no reason to stop him in the first place." His words sparked murmurs of agreement, and a few others began to echo similar observations. The original officer's face flushed with anger as the senior officer turned to her, his expression now serious. The crowd leaned in, the tension climbing even higher as the situation teetered on the edge of control. The senior officer's gaze shifted between the citizen, the crowd, and the original officer. The tension in the air was undeniable, and it was clear he needed to take control. "Let's take a step back," he said firmly, raising a hand to quiet the murmuring crowd. "I need to understand exactly what happened here." The original officer started to speak, but the senior officer held up a hand to stop her. "I'll hear from you in a moment. For now, let's hear from the citizen and the witnesses." His tone left no room for argument, and the original officer reluctantly stepped aside, her frustration barely concealed. The citizen recounted the events calmly, emphasizing the lack of reasonable suspicion and the officer's increasingly aggressive behavior. Several witnesses chimed in, confirming the citizen's account and pointing out the officer's overreach. The senior officer's expression grew more serious with each word. Finally, he turned to the original officer, his voice low but firm. "Is this true?" Before she could respond, another officer approached him with a phone in hand, showing him a video recorded by one of the bystanders. The footage left no room for doubt. The original officer's actions were clearly out of line. The senior officer sighed deeply, then addressed the crowd. "Thank you for your patience. This will be handled appropriately." As the senior officer escorted the original officer away, the crowd began to disperse, but not before a final twist emerged. Another bystander stepped forward, quietly handing the citizen a business card. "I'm a civil rights attorney," he said. "If you'd like to discuss this further, give me a call." The citizen watched the officers leave, their emotions a mix of relief and lingering disbelief. While the immediate conflict had ended, the story was far from over. This encounter had sparked something bigger, a reminder of the importance of accountability and standing up for one's rights, even in the face of intimidation. As the crowd thinned out, the citizens stood for a moment, taking in what had just happened. It wasn't every day that standing up for your rights led to such a public confrontation, but they knew they had done the right thing. They glanced at the attorney's card in their hand, feeling a sense of validation knowing someone was willing to help if needed. Nearby, a few remaining bystanders offered quiet words of support. "You handled that well," one said. Not everyone would have stayed so calm. The citizen nodded, grateful, but still processing the intense encounter. They knew the situation wasn't just about them. It was a reminder of how important it is to know your rights and to hold those in authority accountable. As they walked away, the sound of distant chatter faded, leaving a strange sense of calm. The incident had ended, but its impact lingered. It wasn't just a story about one person. It was a moment that sparked conversations about justice, respect, and the power of standing firm.